My name is Denny Paul May. Welcome to KVEC and our training on IEP measurable goals. Again, my name is Denny Paul May. I'm a due process consultant here at KVEC. I know most of you guys, and certainly it's a better training when you unmute and talk and ask questions, and we certainly encourage you to do that. Joined by Chastity Craft today, who is our studio engineer. She's going to be helping us with all things in the chat feature, and we appreciate her. My ugly mug, I'm the presenter today, Denny Paul May. And enough about that. We do represent the SERTAC that you see in light green in the eastern portion of the state. We represent 15 school districts, and we're here to serve you. And we really mean that. We'll share our email with you, and you can always reach out to us. We just ask that you CC your director and your principal as you do those things. Keep everybody in the loop about what is going on in your world in special education. We have hard jobs. And, it's just always good to keep everybody in the loop. So today, our targets for our learning is going to be to look at measurable annual goals with a lighter touch on legal issues and progress monitoring. But as we begin our discussion today, we need to talk about a couple of things. There's a couple of Supreme Court cases that really dictate and dominate what we do in terms of what the ideal law expects from public schools when we're servicing students with disabilities. When students with disabilities are in our programs and they qualify for IEPs by first meeting the criteria that's set aside in the disability form, and then also it is you also have to have a severe deficit, one that is going to warrant specially designed instruction. So you're going to be working with students that have significant needs. They need specially designed instruction. They have an adverse effect on their educational performance that it shows up that they're functioning or they're doing academics and behavior in a way that they differ from their peers greatly. And so we need to also always make mention of that. There's also talk about how well are we doing when a student has an IEP, how much benefit are they going to get from that IEP? And measurable annual goals link right into that talk, okay? So way back in 1982, before probably any of you were born, there was a case, and I've talked about it at length in lots of my trainings, and it was the Amy Raleigh case. And Amy Raleigh was a little girl in upstate New York who was hearing impaired. She was actually deaf, but she had a really extremely high IQ. And her parents thought that would be more beneficial for her, that she would get more benefits from her IEP if she had an interpreter all day long. Well, what they failed to recognize was that Amy Raleigh didn't want an interpreter, and she was doing just fine, matriculating from grade to grade with the IEP that she had that didn't include that additional accommodation or additional service. And so the parents asked the school system to include that. They sued actually for that. And it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. This court case, it went through the appellate courts, and they said basically that Amy was matriculating from grade to grade. She was getting a benefit from the IEP, and that the IEP didn't have to be maximizing. It just had to be a minimum opportunity for advancement. And as long as she was advancing from grade to grade and the school was passing her along, then she was getting enough benefit from the IEP. Well, she was special because, as all our children are, she had a really high intellect. So when you take that into account, that's one way of looking at how much benefit you get from an IEP. Now, we deal with students that are from one end of the spectrum to the other as far as intellect is concerned. And so we started to see cases emerge across all the appellate courts in the United States, and there's 10 of those. And we are actually in Kentucky in the 6th Court of Appeals. And folks started to recognize and realize that this de minimis approach to providing a benefit from educational programs like IEPs was not always enough for students that had more significant needs, including those students that are FMD or have autism or have severe deficits. And so the courts, depending on their philosophy, depending on the area of the country, depending on their needs or their wants, actually, not their needs, but depending on their wants, those courts started to say, oh, well, a de minimis approach to providing an IEP service is not enough. You're not giving education at all. For these students that need more, we need to do more. And so we started to see appellate courts like the Sixth start to ramp up and provide students with more and more services from their IEP. And then in 2017, after several of the appellate courts, like the one in the 10th, which is it covers Colorado, that's where Andrew F. came from. And Andrew F. was a young man that had autism and had significant needs, just like we were talking about. So he's actually on the opposite end of the spectrum, so to speak, from Amy Rowley, who is now a college professor even. And she has, learned to accommodate, learned to, supersede her barriers or get around the barriers of being deaf. And she actually functions very well in California as a professor. Now, Andrew was a young man that had, like I said, had significant needs. He had anxiety about, using public restrooms. He was scared of a water bottle turning over. He was terrified of the common housefly. And he was going to school out in Colorado. And for the first 5 years of his life, the school system, they started initially to think about some behavior modification for him. He was an eloper. He got fixated on a timer that they used as part of their behavior intervention plan that they initially set in the IEP. And essentially, as he grew and he got older, his behavior continued to worsen. And his parents said, enough is enough. We're going to take him out of school. We're going to send him down the road to this autism special school called Firefly, of all things. And so when they enrolled him at Firefly, the tuition was about $70,000 a year. But what Firefly did was they began to assess his behavior. And they did a functional behavioral assessment and they wrote a behavior intervention plan. And by this time, Andrew was in about the 5th grade. And they started to see significant improvement in his behavior. No longer was he running away. No longer was he having, the meltdowns or the outbursts. He was beginning to be trained to be able to use and stay in the classroom without fear of the teacher's water bottle turning over or the anxiety of not being able to use the public restroom all day. So he started to improve because they had assessed him properly, they had written a plan that was working, and they had implemented that plan. And so they went back to the public school system and they said to the public school, hey, will you take this plan that they've developed over here at Firefly? We want to bring our son back. It costs a lot to attend Firefly, but he also has a brother that attends your school, and we would like for you just to incorporate what we've learned into his IEP. And the school said flatly, no, we've been offering an IEP, and they applied a de minimis approach, and it was just merely what the court said, merely de minimis. And so the Supreme Court, knowing that all the other appellate courts had varying levels of approach to applying the standard to the IEP and how much benefit the student was going to get from the IEP, they said, we're going to hear this case. In 2017, they heard the case. And they came back and said, to provide de minimis educational opportunities is to provide no education at all. We have to do some things for the student. And one of the things that we make sure that we have to do is we have to make sure that parents are involved in the development of the IEP. And that's one of the things as special ed teachers, you need to be thinking about when you write up your conference summaries. You need to have a back and forth conversation with the parent as to what they think is working and what's not working and what they think needs to be in the IEP, so that you have active participation from the parent. These parents of Andrew had no active participation. They were by and large just copying and pasting goals from year to year, and they had no progress monitoring. There was no progress monitoring on behavior. There was no progress monitoring on his ability to read, to communicate, to be involved in social situations. And these were all things that they were needing to work on, and they were not. They had no data to support that they had done anything with this student. And when you listen to Jack Robinson talk, he was the attorney that took this case for Andrew all the way to the Supreme Court. He said the main thing was that the district did not have any evidence of anything that they had done to implement. And so, but because of this failure to implement, the court ruled, well, they actually sent it back. They remanded it back to the appellate court in Colorado with their recommendations. And they said, we have to have an IEP that's written, that's reasonably calculated, to be measurable, to be ambitious, and it's to be written in a way that it's going to bring about reasonable progress. And it's also, we have to take into account the student's unique circumstances. Now, what does that mean? That certainly means that the student's current level of functioning needs to be addressed. And we can't apply blanket goals to students. We have to individualize each program. And so that was the outcome. Now, if you look at this slide right here, 12% of students in American schools, roughly 12%, have IEPs. However, 90% of all the litigation that go into the court system in education from public schools, 90% of it has to do with a school's failure to provide appropriate IEPs, for lack of a better way of saying it. Writing measurable goals, having progress monitoring, making sure that the documentation has been taken care of in the proper manner. And so when you have a FAPE violation, when your free appropriate public education is not being provided and the student's not getting any meaningful benefit, the IEP's not been reasonably calculated, then you're going to get litigation. And when you get litigation, if they find either a procedural error, a substantive error, or an implementation error, and we're going to talk about that in depth a little bit here a little bit later. When they find these errors, they essentially come back and say, hey, the school system is failing to provide the student with an adequate, free, appropriate public education, which is what IDEA is all about. And so I'm going to ask you now, we're going to do a little activity in your own words. Tell why students have IEPs and place that answering it. What is an IEP? Why do students have IEPs? What is it that we're trying to accomplish with an IEP? And let's see where you guys are in terms of that. So think for a second and then place your answers in the chat. Chaz, at least take a stab at it. What do you think IEPs mean? What does it mean to have an IEP? You can just, you don't have to type it, just tell us.
I was oh, here we go. Right on cue.
Right.
We have an answer in the chat.
Yeah. Ashley says because they have learning disabilities and they need extra help. That's exactly right.
It also, I think, to describe an IEP, it just did. Oh, I am going to. Here
No,
it comes.
ahead,
It just took them a while to type, Denny Paul. Give them time to type.
I want to hear your thoughts, Chastity. I really do.
Well, let's see what they have first.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
So Renee, an individualized plan to provide services to children who have specific needs, so they can get an education appropriate to them.
I like it.
And Scott says to ensure the needs of the student are being met, their goals, and an outline of how they will be met, and it is a legal document.
Gosh, Scott, I love that you say it's a legal document because it is a contract that we enter into. And a lot of the courts will say, hey, if you're not implementing, you're not providing, you don't have progress monitoring, you don't have goals written appropriately, we may have a problem, right? So great catch there. It is a legal document. Go ahead.
Ashley says it also creates a plan for teachers to understand how the student learns.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of what we do with present level, Ashley, is all about that. Determining how they learn, looking at that general intelligence piece. What are those 5 areas of the WISC and what do they mean? The verbal comprehension and all of those kinds of things. So that's a very good answer as well. And all these answers are great, by the way.
Katie also says um, that IEP is individualized education plan. They
Okay.
are typically not on grade level or socializing or adaptive. It's
Mhm.
filled out with information about the individual student, and goals are created based on the data and information so that we can monitor their progress. Modifications and accommodations are meant for them to be able to be successful in school. We are legally obligated to make sure that all parts of the document are followed.
That's exactly right. And that implementation piece gets lots of people in trouble. And where it really falls off the table, and I really appreciate your answer. That, Katie, that was great. Um, where it really falls off the table is when we don't have progress monitoring. Now, Chastity, you're not off the hook. Don't you be turning your mute button on. What do you have to say about it? I want to hear. I want to hear because she does a lot of work around specially designed instruction, and they have a tremendous tool that all of you need to know about, which is the literacy tool that helps determine what the special things are that we're going to give kids. Right? Go ahead, Chas.
It's hard to follow up after hearing all these good answers, but aside from what they all said, um, it does that specially designed instruction, which goes back to one of them had said how they learn. So it's a guide for us to be able to what to teach them and how to teach, and just really for me just see what skills they need. You got to find the skill that's in there, and
Yeah, and one of the problems I see, Chas, and I know you don't do a lot of folder review, but you have been on folder review teams with me before, and that's one of my main jobs. And her job is to teach you how to teach. Um, I know that's a real simplistic view of it, but that's exactly what we do. We look at those IEPs and we say, how can we make them better? How can we? And what we see a lot of times is we'll have a goal that's written with 3 or 4 skills in one goal. And so we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about how we can, do a better job of writing goals and making sure that they're appropriate and they're reasonably calculated to bring about progress in light of the student's unique circumstances, right? So we have to meet them where they are. And Chas, one of the things that we do in present level is, and we were about to say that, and we kind of got sidebarred just a little bit because I jump all over the place sometimes. But one of the things we do in present levels, we have to determine in that present level what the current level of functioning is. And Mitchell Yale, who is the definitive voice on reasonably calculated IEPs, he will tell you if you are not um, calculating that IEP, if you're not uh, looking at that current level of functioning and you're not providing that student with that service, anytime you raise a need in that present level. So sometimes I'll read a present level and it'll have 50 needs in it, right? And we're not sure which one goes with the baseline, right? And so we have to tighten that down and specifically say in the present level, there's going to be a reading need. And maybe there's 2 reading needs. Maybe it's fluency, maybe it's vocabulary, maybe it's comprehension. But we're going to narrow it down to a skill and we're going to associate a baseline with that. And we're going to do that based on test scores, and we're going to, you know, funnel that down to one discrete skill. And And Katie says the PLAF, that's the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That's a very good long acronym that you placed in there, Katie, but it's exactly right. And we shorten it in Kentucky and just call it present levels, but I like when you use that because what it does is emphasizes the need to do functional performance, which sometimes we gloss over. But it should be directly reflected in the goals. Okay, so we have a baseline over here that says we're going to work on reading comprehension, and the baseline's 20%. Is it enough just to say we're going to work on reading comprehension 20%, or do we need to know exactly what level that student's working on? And that's something we really need to tighten down. Do we know, is it third grade instructional level? Is it the fifth grade instructional level? And Andrew, the case said, the student needs to have ambitious goals. So when we say that, we're looking at, hey, ambition means we're going to push that student into an uncomfortable area where there's productive struggle, and we're going to scaffold that kid until they can read better at that level. And so that's huge, and that's a great answer, Chas. Thank you. And also, Katie, thank you for the comments, and all of you for the comments on this little particular activity. It's so much better when we get answers from you. It means the world to us. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's look here for just a second and just see the IEP is the cornerstone of faith. It is the legal contract. It's the blueprint, okay, of which a student receives a free, appropriate public education, which they're entitled to when they're eligible for special education services in Kentucky. And so it says the IEP is a process in which parents and school-based personnel develop. Now notice that, how I brought those parents in there. Okay, super important that you include them in the development of the IEP and implement an educational program for student success, and then that the program is evaluated. So it's very, that's the way we look at how we're doing with these kids. And so when we look at Andrew in summary here, what is an IEP? IEPs are reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of their unique circumstances. Is it a marker that we still look at to see if they're matriculating from grade to grade? Yes, it is. That part of the test is not gone. Is it the Andrew and the Rally cases together provide us with, we have to do the procedures. We have to get the check boxes right. We have to get all the components of the goal. We have to make sure that we have all the check boxes in the IEP completed, that we get the right people to come to the meetings, that we give a 7-day notice, that we give them the procedural safeguards in full copy, and that we go over it and we ask them if they have any questions about those things. And so, yes, students must have challenging goals and objectives, if appropriate, and a student's program must be appropriately ambitious. The essential function of the IEP is to pursue academic and functional advancement. Now, I would just like to ask you a really quick question. Give me an example really quick in the chat of an academic function. What are we talking about when we talk about academics? And what are we talking about when we're talking about functions? What are we talking about, functional performance versus academic? Give me an example of each. Reading on grade level. Okay, reading grade level, academic performance, reading comprehension, written expression, math reasoning. Good. Good, Katie. Yes. What about function? When we think about function, we look at that, social skills, adaptive, following directions, executive functioning is what we're talking about, right? Being able to impulse control, being able to pay attention, being able to set goals, being able to operate in social situations, like you said, being able to communicate so that they can function, get their wants and needs met, to have meaningful relationships. Those are all pieces that we have to address. So when we look at that present level in the IEP around function, it goes in that social emotional piece, and we look at those higher scores that we get on the Vineland and the lower scores that we get on the Vineland. And we have to be realizing that if we have students that have significant needs there, we have to address that with a goal and service. Sometimes it might mean counseling. Sometimes it might mean behavior intervention. Sometimes it might mean a goal that's written to help students advocate for themselves. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. And the federal government's been pretty heavy-handed, and OSEP has been pretty clear in their guidance. And they even told Mitchell Yale one time when he was addressing IEPs, he was talking too much about academic function and not enough about the executive function. And so those are all pieces that are missing. And the federal government realizes too that a lot of our students come to us ill-equipped to learn. We have to teach them to learn first and then teach them the information that they need to know. And we have to work on not only accessing the curriculum, but also increasing their ability or closing the gap on those skill deficits that we see, whether they be academic or functional, either one. And so let's move on. So the idea from all this has two parts. It really has more than that. It has four parts, but we're going to talk about two of those parts today. The two parts that the idea has that came out of the Rally case and that came out of the Indra case is procedural and substantive. So if you are sued in your particular, or the school system that you work for is sued, you won't be sued personally, although sometimes they do hold people's feet to the fire on some of this stuff, just depending on the court and where it's at in the country. And behavior is exactly right, Ashley, and thank you for that answer in the chat as well, in terms of adaptive and functional performance. But we already talked about this, touched on this a little bit. Procedure means the check boxes. Okay, procedure means making sure you got all the components of the IEP present, that you have all the people sign the document, that you have all the right people at the ARC table. Those are things that you always give a 7-day notice, that you always provide once a year and document that you've given the parent rights to the parents. Those are procedural things. Then when you get into the substantive thing, that's where you're actually writing that IEP. You're identifying in the present level what actually the current level of functioning is. You're providing data, and just under that is an implementation piece that goes with idea. So we got to write the IEP. We got to have the substantive part in there. We got to follow all the procedures to get the IEP correct. We got to get all the components, and we got to do it in a way that brings about progress, because that's the one thing that is our evidence that we've actually worked with the kid, and the contract we've entered into, we're actually doing something with that student to move them ahead. Now, it doesn't say how much progress they have to make. It says reasonably calculated amount of progress, right? Reasonably calculated IEPs to bring about reasonable progress. Okay, so the procedures are just that, check boxes. The substantive goes into developing the IEP, developing the measurable goals so that you can measure it and that you've got some substance to what you're implementing. And when you go to implement, are you implementing it correctly? That's where chastity kind of comes in, as far as, are we teaching and are we providing strategies that are research-based and peer-reviewed, and that they have, that you've properly implemented so to bring about progress. And then the other I said there was 4 pieces of FAPE or idea, and the fourth piece is actually the capacity piece, and that's something that we've kind of glossed over a little bit too in our trainings. But we have to have the people in the trenches in order to do this, to do the implementation, to take the data. And so the expectations are high and the funding is low. And so procedure, substance, implementation, and capacity in districts to provide these things are all pieces of idea. And so I wanted you to think about that as we move through. So the safeguards are designed to protect the rights of parents. Procedural requirements of the IDEA include the how and when we are providing idea. And that was the Rally part of the test. That's what Rally, that case, gave us. We got to get the procedures right. And then Andrew came along and said we got to get the substance right. And so the substantive part says we got to have proper assessments. We have to have a present level that's informed by proper assessment, an assessment that's individualized, that's not biased, that is that it tests for all the needs that were raised in the referral. And then we have to have measurable annual goals. We have to have research-based programming, and we have to monitor that progress. And we have to make sure that there's internal consistency in the IEP. It's like an example they used at the State Department recently with us has been that if you say that a student needs a calculator on the state test, you have to address that in special factors, but you first have to raise that need with data that shows that there's a need for that calculator on the state test. When we remove the calculator, this is what the student does. When we give them the calculator, this is how the student does. And that needs to be documented in your present levels. It also needs to be documented in your special factors under assistive technology. It also has to be listed in supplementary aids and services as something the student needs. And then you also have to have it in your services. So, and checkboxed appropriately on the state test section of the IEP. Now, when you look at the big picture, we have to have proper assessment that address academics, functional, and behavioral pursuits. We have to have in our programming, in that substantive piece, we have to have measurable goals, and we have to provide special education related services. And then the monitoring progress piece comes. Are we formatively evaluating students currently? Are we providing them with opportunities to respond at a high rate? Are we checking for understanding often? And are we taking data? And are we meeting the reporting requirements? Now, one of the things I see when I look at folders is I see a conference summary that leaves out the data. We have to put the data in. We have to do the analysis on the progress monitoring, and we have to share it with parents. And we have to address it and talk about it and discuss it and put it in the conference summary. So it's super important that when we think about that progress data, how's the student done? When you say you're going to do an annual review, there needs to be internal consistency in that conference summary as well. We're checking on the notice that we're doing an annual review, and then we get over there and we're looking, where's the talk or where's the discussion about how much progress is made on the goal? What were the services we provided? What were the changes we made? And are we showing progress? What goals we're going to keep? What goals we're going to get rid of? What goals we're going to tweak? And that's what we're talking about when we talk about substance and implementation. We have to meet those procedures. We have to get the timelines right. We have to make sure that we got the check boxes, and we have to make sure that we do all of these pieces. And it's a big job, guys. It's a huge, big job. Okay, so based on full present level statements need to be based on full and individualized assessments. And then the IEP team determines the student's unique educational needs, both academic, functional, and you can throw behavioral in with it, and explains the effects of the student's disability on learning and involvement in the general education curriculum. Because it says with this, the student should be able to meet the standards. And so when we're writing IEP goals, we have to think about standards, but we also have to think about where that current level of function is, and we have to find the right amount of both accommodation and instruction in order to provide FAPE. And then we have to progress monitor it and make sure that we're capturing it. Now, in the present level statements in the IEP guidance document from Kentucky, it says we have to have strength-based data, needs-based data, we have to have test scores, and adverse effect statements. Now, sometimes out of those test scores, like in the academic section or the social emotional section, when they're going to result in a goal, an annual measurable goal, then we have to take all the test scores. We have to take the Kentucky Summative Assessment. We have to take the MAP scores. We have to take the IXL data. And then we have to take the data on progress monitoring, and we have to throw that all into a big mixer, roll it around, and say, this is the key discrete skills that the student needs to work on that are going to turn into goals. Now, sometimes, like in general intelligence, when we look at that present level, we're saying, okay, present level, general intelligence, what do we do there? What do we put there? Kids has an intellectual disability. We can't check the box. So we have to do strengths, we have to do needs, we have to do test scores, and we have to do an adverse effect statement. Now, the one thing that's very different about the general intelligence piece on present level is that when you write the general intelligence piece, you need to make sure that you are linking the residual effects of like let's say the student has working memory issues, or the student has a verbal comprehension issue, or they have visual spatial issues, or they have processing speed things. We want to see that we want to see that come to life in the specially designed instruction. That is going to inform how we provide specially designed instruction under those goals. But it's also going to say, hey, because this kid has working memory issues, we're seeing a baseline over here in reading. So we would link that discussion back to that baseline in reading in the academic achievement piece. Very, very key piece here when we're talking about general intelligence. If we have deficits in those areas, we need to address those areas. Even if it's SLD and they have a higher one, if they have a lower outlier score there out of those 5 pieces, we need to address it. And we need to make sure that we're addressing all the needs of the student. Okay? So this little slide comes from Mitchell Yale, and right there we can see, Katie Moore, that they're using PLAF. Okay, and that is in the federal regs. That is in a lot of the documentation. We just shorten it down and call present levels, but it is present levels of academic and functional performance. And this little graphic came, like I said, from the great Mitchell Yale. He is a guy that works at South Carolina, University of South Carolina, as a professor. He's written several books on the legality of IEPs and how well we're providing FAPE. And so we look at this. The first thing we got to do, our first big job in PLAFs or present levels, is to identify the student's need. What is the deficit? What's the problem in reading? Is it fluency? Is it reading comprehension alone? Is it phonemic awareness? Is it actual phonics? Is it the fluency? Is it vocabulary? What is the specific need that this student has right now that we can reasonably calculate a goal for them, and we can work on it for a whole year? Sometimes I see goals, and the goals look like they are only going to last for about 3 months, right? The goals are not near broad enough, but they still have to be based on a discrete need, and that's where the skills come in. We also have to discuss the effect that these needs have on the general education. That comes in the way of an adverse effect statement. And I see adverse effect statements that'll say the student has a disability in reading, therefore he has an adverse effect. Okay, we know that, right? We already know that. So we have to tell how the disability is impacting the student and how does it manifest itself. Does it cause the student to not being able to make sense of what they read? Does it cause the student to, once they can't make sense of what they read, they can't write effectively on the grade level that they're supposed to be operating in? And we have to know the skill that's going to serve as the baseline. And that has to be connected to a goal and service, or both. Okay. And so when we address that baseline, we have to address it with a goal. And when we raise that baseline, it has to be in the form of a number so that we can effectively measure it. Do you know how many components are in a measurable annual goal according to the IEP? I said we're going to do a waterfall and name them. Can you name all 6 of the components? Let's see what we have here with our chat. Now the IEP guidance document requires 6 different components. That is a procedure, and it's going to turn into a substance if you don't get it measurable, if you don't write it in a measurable way. So what are the components that are required from the IEP guidance document when you write a measurable annual goal to meet the needs of this student that has a disability? Place those in the chat if you don't care. Yeah, there's one, Katie. Good. Audience, that's the student's name, right? Very good. What are some of the other required components?
One thing while they're thinking and typing, me being the literacy piece, thinking about mnemonics, and we do a lot of acronyms, but like there's 6, every time I did it just now in my head, you said 6, so A, B, C, D, E, F, and that mnemonic that goes with that, because that's the first 6 letters of the alphabet. So that would
Love it.
maybe help clue in on what some of
What
them
did my
are.
master teacher just do for you guys? We'll call that scaffolding, right? She scaffolded you, helped you to remember, right? Maybe you have students in your class that have working memory issues, and you have to help them remember, right? They can't remember basic math facts. They can't remember what they read. So the A, B, C, D, E, F is exactly correct. So let's just, since we're I see some things coming in there. Frequency of data collection, the behavior, those are all good, Katie. Those are all key pieces. Let's just go over to the next slide and see what we have here. Okay, so we're going to throw it up here for you guys to look at, okay? And Chastity was exactly right. But you have to know what they mean, right? First you're going to get the letters, then you're going to try to get the words, and then you have to, you have to know what they mean, okay? Um, so this one uses a different word here. Condition, circumstance is the correct word, actually. And Katie Moore put that in there for me. I appreciate you reminding me. But it is the conditions under which the behavior is going to occur. It's the givens. It's Barbara Bateman wrote a book on how to write IEP goals a few years back, and it became a good read for nerds like me who like to think about these things. But she said the condition or the circumstance is the given. Given a graphic organizer and a checklist, or given a reading passage on a particular instructional level, those are types of circumstances. And that really starts our whole role of writing that goal. Okay. Then when we set it up and we do it, we start with the circumstance, we start with the conditions. What are the conditions for the behavior? How are we going to measure? Is it going to be in a small group? Are we going to do it? Is the student going to have some type of scaffold? Is there going to be something that you're going to give them? What are the givens? Okay, that's what you need to think about. And then next comes usually given something, then the student comes next, that audience piece. So we go C, A, and then what comes next? What do you all think? The behavior. The behavior comes next. It's what skill or behavior the student will perform, and then how well they're going to perform it is the degree criterion. And then the evaluation method is going to be what kind of tool, and we have specific ones in the IEP guidance document. What type of tool are you going to use? And we need to embed that in the goal. And how often will progress be monitored? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be twice a week, twice a month? If we're going to do it 3 times a week, what you're going to just spell that out, right? And so when we look at that, I wanted to also have a discussion about sometimes you guys go to universities like the University of the Cumberlands, and sometimes those professors come from other states because we do a lot of online training now, don't we? And in other states, they talk about SMART goals, okay? And the time-bound piece here, the very bottom part of that acronym, SMART, goals have to be specific, okay? Now, when we say that our goals in Kentucky, do they have to be specific? Yes, the behavior is discrete. It's a discrete skill. It has to be specific to the student. Do they have to be measurable? Yes, we're going to use an evaluation method. We're going to progress monitor. We're going to say how often we're going to take data. And the verb itself has to be measurable, okay? There's a list of verbs in the IEP guidance document. You either have to be able to see, count, hear, or time the action. You can't use words like improve, okay, increase, and those types of things. We'll show you just in a second why. And then the ambitious piece. It has to be, if the student can read at the 3rd grade level and they can get 90% of the questions correct, they're independent at that level, okay? We have to push them ahead into an uncomfortable zone where they're going to have productive struggle, and we're going to teach them how to read phonetically. We're going to teach them how to look for context clues. We're going to teach them how to look for the details. We're going to teach them strategies, and then all of a sudden they're a better reader, right? So we really have to work on pushing them ahead and making it ambitious, making it something where we can see that productive struggle. So the baseline is going to be lower when we start. That's going to be the starting point, and that's what we're going to place in that present level. and then we're going to set a goal up there. And when it's reading, if for a year, most students need not 3 months of progress on the WJ3 or the Wyatt. We need to see progress that's going to mean something. We're going to move that kid ahead based on their earlier rates of improvement, and we're going to move them ahead to hopefully a 90% on that next grade level, and we can keep moving and keep churning it out and moving from grade level to grade level. And all of a sudden then, all of our hard work through direct, explicit instruction, lots of progress checks, lots of checks for understanding, lots of great strategies, then all of a sudden we've got a kid that can read on 7th or 8th grade level. But that's the only way I know to do it, right? And then when you look at is it reasonable? Is it based on that student's current level of functioning, and is it time bound? The time bound is implied here. We say annual goal in Kentucky, so we don't put by the end of the year. So a lot of times I'll be going through, and I read one today. I was reviewing a brand new teacher's file, and they said by the end of the year, Johnny will improve his reading comprehension. Is that a measurable goal? Well, it's time bound. Is it reasonable? We don't know, right? Is it ambitious? We don't know what grade level he's on, right? So he left a lot of stuff out with that, but he put that time stamp on there, that time bound piece, because he learned in SMART goals that that's what you're supposed to do, right? But in Kentucky, we imply it, okay? So yes, Kentucky goals require more, and that's the way the law works. We're able to require more than the feds require, but we still have to say that Kentucky goals are also specific, they're measurable, they're ambitious, and they're reasonable, okay? And I think when you get all 6 components and you get the data right and you've got internal consistency of the IEP, then that's what you're going to have, okay? So I wanted to say SMART goals are not bad. SMART goals, we just require more in Kentucky, more direct explanation and more detail in our goals than is required in a SMART goal. Why should goals be specific? Here's what Mitchell Yale has to say about that. Goals must address the academic functional needs in the PLAF. And now we have got a question in here. Okay, so Katie Moore says, so do we have to include the time-bound piece or just leave it off? I was taught to include it, so I have been. You leave it out. You don't have to put it. You do not have to put that. And so we asked in Kentucky, we asked you to tell how often you're going to take data. We ask you to make sure you got your verb measurable, but we do not ask you to say by the end of the year or within the next 4 months or anything like that, Katie. So thank you for that question. Great. And then goals provide a mechanism for determining if a student is making progress in his or her special education program. And Katie, let me say the implication is we're going to review progress periodically. We're going to tell how often we're going to review progress. Kentucky's very specific about that. And so that's going to take care of that, how much progress they made in this amount of time. It's always going to be an annual goal. And right here, if the goals are not specific, there was a typo right here. They are reasonable calculated. Old Mitchell Yell and old DP always makes mistakes. But I went in here and fixed it. I said not reasonably calculated. If goals are not specific, they're not reasonably calculated. So we got to make sure it's a specific, discrete skill that we're working on, and we've assessed it, we've probed it, and we've provided it with a baseline percentage. When I pop open your IEPs and I look at that present level, I can tell you whether or not progress monitoring is being done by simply reading the present level. I don't have to look for the progress monitoring, because if there's not any numbers in the present level, there's not any progress monitoring. You can't possibly do it without writing it down. Now, you might be doing it in some magical kind of way, but I've not figured that out yet, okay? You got to have a starting point that's low. It's got to be ambitious. Got to put them in the zone of proximal development, an area where there's going to be productive struggle, but you've got to really work on it. Now, there was a court case here out of Rio Rancho, New Mexico a few years ago, and they got in trouble for using words like increase and improve. Those are not measurable verbs. There's a list of measurable verbs in the IEP guidance document. Here's what they have to be. They have to be measurable. They have to be verifiable. You have to be able to observe them. They have to be repeatable. They can be counted frequently, It's things like to write, to read, to aloud, point to understand, and those kinds of things. Not open to many interpretations, to understand, to enjoy, and improve. Those are not visible. You can't measure them. There's that list of measurable that you can see count here in time. That is an addendum on page 88 of the IEP guidance document. It's there for you. If I were you, I would laminate that and put it on the side of my desk and use that. And when I write an annual goal, I make sure I've got one of these words in there: solve, read, scoot, throw, okay, jump, zip. Things we can see, they're tangible, okay? All right, let's do a little practice here as we're running really thin on time. Let's do a little practice. How can you identify who is the audience here? Place it in the chat. Who's the audience? Mickey's the audience. Good. What's the circumstance? What's the condition? What's the given? Given a third grade reading passage. Now, Chastity, based on what you know about teaching reading, is there enough information? Given a third grade reading passage, what would we like to see there? And is it important to know that? What if that third grade reading passage is their independent level? Is that going to be a measurable goal that's going to move a kid ahead? Is that going to be an ambitious goal? So we need to think about when we're writing that goal, we put that in the conditions that we say, we're going to give him a reading passage on his instructional level at the third grade. Then we know that the kid's baseline is low, and we're going to strive for another, a better level. Mickey will fluently read the passage. Can we count that? Can we see it? And I see, given a third grade reading passage there, at 78 words per minute over 4 consecutive trials, as measured by a weekly oral reading fluency probe. So you can see those things come to life there. 4 consecutive trials measured by a weekly probe, 4 consecutive trials at 78 words per minute. Now, what do we have to know to make sure that we know that student's progressing? We have to know what the industry standard is, or what is expected of a third grade student when they have a reading passage, how many words they're supposed to be reading at that particular time. So this would need some work, okay? So in closing here, we got to know the present level. If the box is not checked, we got to identify the needs. We got to look at the strengths. And then we have to write a baseline based on data, okay? Things that we see, count, hear, and time. So when we write those, we say baseline level on a particular skill and include progress monitoring. How a student's need or disability affects their educational performance and the access to the general education curriculum. That's student performance data. We have to make sure when we write the needs that it's culminating in a percentage. Okay? Now, we're going to skip ahead here as our time is running thin. I had some other great things planned for you, but I went way too long on Andrew. This comes right out of the IEP guidance document. This is a template that shows you how to write it. You would start with the C part, the conditions. You would go to the A part, the A, and then you would put the verb in and how well they're going to do it and how you're going to measure it and how frequently you're going to take data. Okay. Easy CBM is a good site to get fluency probes. I love that. Thank you, Chas. And I had some more things here. You can have all 6 components sometimes and there still not be a measurement. Bi-weekly, we see that sometimes. Don't use the word bi. Do not use that when you write your frequency data collected. Stay away from that. Do twice weekly or twice monthly. Don't write the word bi because it's vague. Okay? And we'll skip on ahead. We had some other things to look at here, goal activities and methods of measurement. But we're going to skip ahead here. And I really want to talk to you real quick in 30 seconds about this court case. This court case was a student in Alabama. He had a 3.4 GPA. He graduated from high school with honors, and he had dyslexia and could not read. What happened? They did not teach him how to read. They had no evidence that taught him how to read. They didn't have any reasonably calculated goals. They did not really work on his foundational skills. He ended up suing. It's in the Sixth Circuit, which is in Kentucky, and what we ended up getting was 888 hours of compensatory ed. So we got to make sure that we write measurable annual goals and that we know how to progress monitor them. My name's Denny Paul May. There's my phone number. We really appreciate you guys.